Usually when we talk about changing how a company operates, there's this, I don't know, this underlying expectation of absolute precision.
Oh, completely. Like it's an engineering problem.
Right. We want it to look like engineering. The assumption is, like, if you want to change a sprawling corporate process, you just write a comprehensive memo.
Yep.
You send a company-wide email, update the manual, and boom, the entire organization just, flawlessly executes that pivot.
It is an incredibly comforting illusion, honestly. I
Yeah.
mean, we craze predictability.
Yeah.
So we try to categorize the workplace as a programmable mechanism.
Yeah.
You input the new command, and you just expect the system to update without any glitches.
But then, you step into the real world. You try to get a group of messy, complex human beings to actually do something different on a Tuesday morning. And that pristine machine metaphor completely falls apart.
Shatters.
It really does. So welcome to the deep dive. Whether you are prepping to pitch a massive strategic pivot in a boardroom or figuring out how to get your small team to just use a new piece of software.
Or even if you're just intensely curious about how groups of humans operate under pressure.
Exactly. This deep dive is custom tailored for you. Today, we are exploring the elusive art of organizational change. How it actually sparks, why it so often fails spectacularly, and the actual mechanisms that make it stick.
And to do this, we are synthesizing some brilliant material today. Rather than just looking at theoretical models, we're blending academic research on sustainable development with actual boots-on-the-ground consulting frameworks.
Yeah, we've got a great stack of sources.
We really do. We're going to map out the entire life cycle of a transformation, from the sticky realities of evaluating your initial progress all the way to knowing when it's finally time to just step away from an intervention.
We're going to look at why treating your company like an engine block is essentially dooming your change initiatives before the kickoff meeting even happens.
Right.
And to give you a little teaser, we're going to explore how a chance encounter on a 16-hour flight to Halifax proves that real organizational change is actually just a highly contagious conversation.
I love that story. That flight is the perfect entry point because it gets right to the core of why so many capable leaders pull their hair out trying to get their teams to adapt.
Yeah.
It all comes down to how we fundamentally view communication within a system.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our academic source for today, it's a paper by Francis Meinel, draws a massive distinction between what is called a first-order and a second-order approach to change.
Right.
And the first-order approach is essentially that machine illusion we just talked about. It assumes that if you write a clear enough memo, the people receiving it will perfectly decode your message and change their behavior on the spot.
Like a TV broadcast.
Yes, exactly like a broadcast.
Or, data transmission across a fiber optic cable.
Huh.
The first order approach is strictly linear, top-down, and hierarchical.
Uh-huh.
The underlying logic here is that there are clear, universally accepted rules for encoding and decoding information. So the manager, acting as the sender, beams the signal.
Right.
And the employee, acting as the receiver, passively absorbs the data and acts on it.
Which, anyone who has ever sent an urgent company-wide email knows that the passive absorption part is a complete fantasy.
Oh, absolutely.
The message gets ignored, it gets skimmed, or just entirely misinterpreted.
It fails because it completely ignores the reality of human neurobiology and, lived experience.
Yeah.
First-order thinking assumes that the observer, like the change agent or the executive, is standing completely outside the system, looking down at it with this detached, objective engineering look.
Right, like you're hovering above a maze.
Exactly. But the second-order approach, which our source material strongly advocates for, grounds us in reality. It forces us to acknowledge that the person trying to mandate the change is actually trapped inside the system with everyone else.
You are in the messy middle of the machinery. You can't stand outside of it.
You're right in the thick of it. And because you are inside it, communication is no longer a pristine data transmission. It becomes an interactive, highly subjective, relational conversation.
It's messy.
It is. The source uses a brilliant contrast here. Instead of picturing a TV broadcast, you need to picture a bustling Middle Eastern marketplace or a lively dinner party.
Oh, I like the dinner party analogy because at a dinner party, you aren't just downloading data into the brain of the person sitting across the table from you.
Right.
You make a point, and they immediately filter your words through their own current mood, their past experiences, and whatever complex relationship they have with you specifically.
Exactly.
And then they respond based on that filter. It is entirely fluid.
The academic term for this is self-referential. Second-order communication accepts that the receiver is actively constructing the meaning of your message based on their own unique biological and experiential history.
Wow.
Yeah, the paper explicitly points out that the conduit metaphor of learning, treating people like empty vessels to be filled, denies the learner their capacity to derive their own meaning.
So if you are a manager trying to implement, say, a new remote work policy tomorrow,
Yep.
you cannot view yourself as a masterful teacher passing absolute truth down to an uninformed pupil.
No, not at all.
You have to account for the fact that the team will interpret the policy through their own fears about job security, their history with previous policy rollbacks, their personal stress levels.
You are entering into a negotiation of meaning.
Which presents a massive logistical problem, right?
Oh, massive.
If change isn't a trackable memo with a read receipt, but rather a series of these messy, interactive dinner party conversations, how on earth do we measure it?
That is the million-dollar question.
And this leads us to one of the most fascinating concepts from the academic paper, the conversational lineage.
Yes.
And to really understand the mechanics of this, we have to look at this incredibly specific documented story from the text.
The carpet tile anecdote.
Yes.
It illustrates the concept flawlessly.
So there's this man named Mark who works for a massive global carpet tile company. The paper actually notes their scale is staggering. There's like a 40% chance that any office or hotel you walk into uses their tiles.
That's wild.
I know, right? So Mark is on a brutal 16-hour business flight from Taiwan back to the UK, ultimately heading to Halifax.
Oh, 16 hours.
Right. He is sitting next to the same passenger for the entire flight, so they naturally strike up a conversation just to pass the time.
As you do.
Right. Mark brings up something he's personally deeply invested in, the greenhouse effect. He asks his neighbor if he knows that commercial flying is a massive source of pollution. The neighbor nods.
Okay.
Mark asks if he knows that planting trees physically absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The neighbor agrees again.
So this is the setup. The context has been established through mutual understanding.
Exactly. Then Mark shares the actual mechanism of change. He says, the company I work for calculates my specific share of carbon emissions for this business flight, and they fund the planting of the exact number of trees needed to absorb that carbon.
Which is already pretty cool.
It is, and the neighbor is visibly intrigued. But then Mark drops the absolute kicker. He says, as a token gesture of our commitment, my company doesn't just offset my single seat. They calculate and plant enough trees to offset the emissions for every single passenger on this entire plane.
Oh, wow. What's fascinating here is watching the mechanism of the ripple effect take hold.
Because the neighbor doesn't just keep that information to himself.
Yeah.
He turns around and tells his colleague, sitting a row away.
Right.
That colleague is so impressed, he leans over and tells a passenger across the aisle. That passenger flags down the air hostess to tell her.
It just keeps going.
It does. The air hostess walks straight to the cockpit and tells the pilot. A few moments later, cruising at 30,000 feet, the pilot gets on the intercom.
I love this part.
He announces to the entire aircraft that there is a passenger on board whose company is offsetting the entire flight, effectively making their journey carbon neutral. He publicly praises Mark and his employer.
The momentum of that idea is just staggering. But it jumps an even bigger gap a few days later, doesn't it?
It really does. A week later, Mark is back at his desk near Halifax. His CEO receives a formal letter from the chief executive of the airline itself asking if the incredible story from that Taiwan flight is actually true.
That entire sequence is the textbook definition of a conversational lineage.
Yeah.
The source defines this as a set of distinctions that persist through dynamic conversations over time. I mean, look at the architectural trajectory of that idea.
Right. It started so small.
Exactly. It sparked at the absolute most granular, interpersonal, level 2, tired people talking on an airplane. But because the concept was sticky and, resonant, it traveled up the hierarchy.
Right.
To the departmental level with the flight crew, scaled to the organizational level via the pilot's public announcement, and finally bridged an interorganizational gap between two global CEOs.
It wasn't a heavily vetted corporate press release that caught the airline CEO's attention.
Not at all.
It was a fluid conversation that mutated and traveled entirely on its own merit.
And we really have to look at the specific fuel that propelled that conversation forward. The source material highlights a critical dynamic. These lineages are powered by emotion.
Oh, right.
Specifically, the emotion of enthusiasm acts as the propellant.
Well, because enthusiasm is fundamentally an indicator of possibility, right?
Yes, exactly.
It expands our view of what can happen. Every single person in that chain, the neighbor, the hostess, the pilot, they shared the story because they were genuinely enthusiastic about the possibility of a carbon neutral flight.
When you are trying to map the conversational lineages inside your own organization, enthusiasm is your green light. It shows you exactly where the organic momentum lives.
Right.
On the flip side, the paper explicitly notes that frustration points directly to organizational constraints.
Ah.
If a conversation about, say, a new software tool keeps hitting a wall of frustration in the break room, that negative motion is essentially drawing a map of your structural blockages.
But this honeymoon phase exposes a brutal reality that boots-on-the-ground consultants see all the time. Initial enthusiasm is a phenomenal spark. The conversational lineage catches fire and spreads. But sparks inevitably burn out.
They always do.
Right. Anyone who has survived a corporate transformation knows the cycle. The kickoff meeting is electric, but 6 months later, the momentum is dead and everyone is secretly doing things the old way again.
Yep.
How do organizations keep the fire going when the emotional high wears off?
This is where the consulting frameworks in our stack become crucial. Because organizational gravity always sets in.
Always.
The source outlines the invisible forces that relentlessly pull teams backward into old habits. It's the comfort of complacency, the chaos of competing priorities, and deeply rooted cultures that inherently view new behaviors as a threat.
So we move from the dinner party to the daily grind.
It is the grind, and it requires structural solutions. The module provides a case study of XYZ financial institution to illustrate.
Oh, I remember this one.
Yeah, so they launched a massive digital transformation to modernize their legacy systems, and the initial burst of change was highly successful. They rolled out new tech platforms and, seemingly streamlined their processes.
But very quickly, the employees abandoned the new tools and reverted to their old manual habits.
Exactly.
I can guess why. I mean, if you work in a legacy financial institution, you are practically hardwired to avoid risk.
Spot on.
Even if a new digital tool is objectively faster, it feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar feels risky, so they default to the paper trail they trust.
You've diagnosed the exact structural constraint. They had a deeply rooted culture of risk aversion. Furthermore, leadership celebrated the initial launch and immediately got distracted by other priorities.
So they left a vacuum of authority.
Yes. To fix it, XYZ Financial couldn't just host more enthusiastic dinner party conversations. They had to engineer what the source calls embedded accountability.
Okay, so embedded accountability isn't just like a motivational poster on a wall.
No, definitely not.
It sounds like they actually have to integrate the new behavior into the daily workflow. But what does a change champion actually do on a random Tuesday to fight that culture of risk aversion?
Well, a change champion actively disrupts the old workflow. So if an employee tries to submit a request using the old paper method, the champion intercepts it.
Wow, okay.
They sit down with them, and they actually walk them through the new digital platform right then and there. XYZ Financial also tied adoption metrics to core performance reviews.
That'll do it.
Right. They institutionalized the change so deeply into the operational fabric that going backward to the old paper system was actually more difficult and painful than learning the new digital one.
That's smart. And we see a similar dynamic in the second case study from the module ABC Manufacturing Company.
Yeah.
They attempted a massive organizational restructuring, but they hit a wall because leadership was juggling multiple overlapping change initiatives at the same time.
Which is so common.
So common. The staff was overwhelmed, focus was diluted, and because they lacked any formal feedback loops, leadership didn't even realize they had lost the crowd until the restructuring was completely derailed.
Their intervention required rigorous, continuous monitoring. They implemented weekly employee sentiment surveys and real-time process audits. They had to ruthlessly prioritize the restructuring above all the competing initiatives.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Looking at these sources side by side, we are hitting a massive paradox.
How so?
Well, on one hand, the academic paper is warning us that treating the company like a first-order machine is a disaster. You desperately need that organic, unscripted, second-order conversational lineage to generate the enthusiasm that makes people actually want to change.
Right.
But on the other hand, the consulting framework is warning that if you don't build rigid, formal mechanisms like process audits, KPIs, and embedded accountability, everyone will slide backward.
Yes.
Those mechanisms sound an awful lot like building a machine. How do these two opposing ideas coexist?
That paradox is the absolute essence of effective change management. You need the conversational lineage to generate the will to change, but you require the structural mechanics to provide the way to sustain it over time.
Ah, the will and the way.
Exactly. The enthusiasm is the spark, but true change requires institutionalizing those unscripted behaviors into the literal architecture of the company.
Right.
In fact, the Meynell model explicitly points out that successful conversational lineages eventually solidify into structural elements.
Hmm.
The conversation dictates the new recruitment practices, it redesigns the office layout, or it rewrites the reward systems.
The conversation builds the new machine.
Yes.
I really like that framing. But that brings up the next hurdle. Once you have built this new machine out of conversations and new metrics, how do you actually know if it is working without lying to yourselves?
Oof, yeah.
This brings us to the evaluation deck in our source stack. And according to this presentation, nobody actually wants to evaluate anything.
Evaluation is the great elephant in the room of organizational development. It is incredibly rare to see it done well.
Really?
Yeah. The source material outlines the psychology behind this avoidance. People are terrified of discovering negative results. There's a perceived lack of time to conduct the audits.
Sure.
The initial goals of the change were often too fuzzy to measure accurately anyway.
Yeah.
And then there's the problem of the OD Lone Ranger.
Oh, right. I would assume the OD Lone Ranger, meaning organizational development, is what happens when responsibility is diffused.
Exactly.
Everyone on the leadership team assumes someone else is monitoring the KPIs, so no single person actually takes ownership of the outcome.
The diffusion of responsibility kills evaluation every time. The slide deck pulls a brilliant analogy from a 1987 quote by a researcher named Burke. He argues that evaluating organizational change is exactly like getting your annual physical examination.
That is an uncomfortably accurate comparison.
Isn't it? We all conceptually agree that an annual physical is a vital necessity. We know it's good for our long-term health, but when it actually comes time to schedule the appointment, no one wants to go to the trouble, spend the money, or risk hearing the bad news that their cholesterol is too high.
We would much rather operate on the blind assumption that we are perfectly healthy until a metaphorical organ fails.
Precisely.
But the evaluation deck poses a question that actually made me stop and reread the page. Can you sustain a change too well? Like, is it actually possible to be too successful at locking in a new behavior?
It is entirely possible, and it is a hidden trap for highly efficient companies. An overemphasis on sustaining a current change, locking it down with intense KPIs and rigid compliance audits, can actually create a brittle culture.
A brittle culture?
Yeah, it inhibits the organization's ability to adapt to the next necessary improvement.
Because you have engineered all the flexibility out of the system.
Exactly.
If you lock the behaviors down too tightly, you destroy the environment needed to foster the next conversational lineage. You build a machine that is so heavily reinforced it can never be modified again.
You become a victim of your own success, which means there is a life cycle to all of this.
Yeah.
You spark the change, you build the structures to sustain it, you evaluate it without making it brittle,
Right.
and then you have to face the final stage of change management. The source material refers to this as the ethical exit.
Ethical is a heavy word choice there.
It is.
It implies that staying too long isn't just inefficient for the budget, but that it's actually doing a form of moral or structural damage to the team. Are we talking about creating a toxic dependency?
Precisely. The core mandate of any change intervention, whether you are an external consultant brought in for a 6-month contract or an internal project lead spearheading a new department, is to build internal capacity.
Right.
Not to build a dependency on yourself. The source outlines the tightrope walk here. If you stay too long, you risk developing a mutual dependency where the organization simply cannot function without your constant oversight and permission.
It's like leaving the training wheels on a bicycle for years.
Yeah.
The rider never develops their own sense of balance. But if you take them off too soon, before the muscle memory is there, the rider crashes hard.
Exactly.
So structurally, how do you know when it is actually time to initiate that exit?
The consulting frameworks give us very practical behavioral indicators. Beyond the obvious metrics of a contract concluding or primary KPIs being met, you need to watch the energy of the room.
Okay.
Look for waning interest. Are key stakeholders suddenly missing alignment meetings?
Oh, right.
Are there constant, unexplained delays in implementation? Is there a general sense of boredom settling over either you or the team you are guiding?
Basically, the enthusiasm that initially fueled the conversational lineage has completely evaporated. The green light is gone.
And perhaps the most critical red flag of all, when the consultant or the project lead wants the outcome significantly more than the client or the team actually does.
Wow. Yeah, that's a bad sign.
When you find yourself dragging people across the finish line through sheer force of will, The intervention is over. It is time to exit.
There is a quote from Weisbord in the source text regarding this final stage that is just wonderfully brutal. He says, "Better a clean death than lingering agony."
It sounds stark, but the mechanism behind it is deeply necessary. You cannot just fade out of an intervention.
You can't just ghost them.
No, you have to conduct an intentional, formal ending meeting. You acknowledge the hard work that was done, you explicitly hand over the reins of accountability to the internal team, and you walk away.
Yeah.
You have to provide a clean death to the intervention phase so that the new organizational reality has the space to actually live and breathe on its own.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? The next time you are staring down the barrel of a major initiative, whether you are trying to shake up a sprawling global corporation or just trying to get your local community board to operate more efficiently, remember that you are not programming an engine.
No, you're not.
You cannot just send a meticulously crafted memo and expect instant compliance. You are stepping into the messy middle of the system and you are hosting a conversation.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, all of this theory is only valuable if you apply it.
Exactly.
So look closely at your own workplace tomorrow morning. Try to spot where the actual unscripted conversations are happening. Where are the conversational lineages flowing organically?
Where's the spark?
Right. Where is the enthusiasm pointing toward possibility? And where is the frustration highlighting your blockages? Contrast that reality with the formal corporate memos that are being completely ignored.
You have to hunt for that enthusiasm to map your lineages. But once you find it, you have to transition into the grind. Build the structural accountability, the change champions, the new workflows to fight the inevitable complacency that will set in.
Yep.
And please do not be afraid to evaluate your actual progress like it's a necessary, albeit highly annoying, annual physical exam.
It might save your organization.
Exactly. But I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you look at your own organization this week. We spend so much time and energy trying to figure out how to sustain the new changes we want to make today. But what if that incredibly frustrating resistance to change you are fighting against right now, that stubborn, immovable legacy culture that refuses to adapt, is actually just a perfectly sustained conversational lineage from a leader who left the company 10 years ago?
Oh, wow. That is a profound question to end on. It changes how you look at every entrenched policy.
And it brings us right back to where we started. The machine isn't broken, it's just made of people. Ask yourself, how do you have a conversation with a ghost? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.